my gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
NASA today released the findings from its year-long study of UFOs.
The study of UFOs needs more science and less stigma. That's the recommendation from NASA.
The current existing data and eyewitness reports alone are insufficient to provide conclusive evidence about the nature and origin of every UAP event.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. UFOs have definitely been spotted, but are they proof that aliens exist? Today we'll be talking with David Spergel, the head of NASA's independent study team, which focuses on UFOs, or more accurately, UAPs. That's Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. Things like the giant Tic Tac object, which was spotted by US Navy pilots. Now, Professor Spergel is standing by to talk about that incident and others. But first, here's a quick look at how NASA's been dealing with UAPs in recent times.
I was petrified. I just couldn't move. I was shaking like a leaf. Shaking like a leaf.
Every day, people report seeing a UFO. And while most can be identified, some things just can't be explained.
It's in our DNA to ask why things are the way they are.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
Videos like these have fueled years of UFO speculation and questions about extraterrestrial life. And now NASA will be looking for more answers here.
There's a global fascination with UAP.
There's something out there that was better than our airplane.
600 to 700 G-forces, 13,000 miles an hour.
There's nothing we could build that would be strong enough to endure that amount of force.
This is the kind of thing that back in the day you would have sort of laughed at, but now we've seen these videos.
No obvious signs of propulsion, no wings.
NASA has a statutory authority to look for life in the universe. And this is the first time that NASA has taken concrete action to seriously look into UAP.
The first step is to eliminate the chaff of conventional events before moving on to identify novel phenomena.
We want to shift the conversation about UAP from sensationalism to science.
Most events are explainable as planes, balloons, drones, weather phenomena, and instrument features.
Most UAP sightings result in very limited data. That makes it even more difficult to draw scientific conclusions.
It's rotating.
It is essential to clarify, based on our current findings and methodology, that we find no evidence to suggest that UAP are extraterrestrial in origin.
But we don't know what these UAP are.
And Professor David Spergel joins us now on the Nexus. David Spergel, thank you so much for joining us. Let me start with a very Thank you. Let me start with a very general question. It feels to outsiders and journalists watching on that the news about UAPs or UFOs as they used to be known has changed very much over the last, say, 15, 20 years. Once upon a time, it was all about crackpots and discrediting people, making fun of them and dismissing them, and now it has become really, really serious. We're seeing military witnesses go before Congress. We're seeing NASA taking it much more seriously, and indeed appointing yourself as the head of the independent study team, which was only established last year. Are we correct in drawing that conclusion that it is becoming much more serious now?
Yes, it is, in the sense that the Navy has declassified some images that are raised a lot of questions, a lot of interest. I think they're not understood what's going on in those images. That led the head of NASA, Senator Nelson, to step up and say NASA should play a role in understanding this. The folks at NASA then asked me to lead an independent commission whose charge was to answer the question, how can NASA help in the study of UAPs?
Can we just separate out UAPs/UFOs from extraterrestrial life? you have no problems with saying that UAPs, UFOs do exist. You've seen them, you've spotted them, as it were, and you recognize them. However, that does not necessarily mean that they are of extraterrestrial origin. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, we know that many of the UAPs, when they're identified, turn out to be drones, balloons, airplanes. A good example is the Chinese balloon that drifted over the United States. Had dinner last night with one of my colleagues who flies balloons to study the early universe. Their balloon drifted over Phoenix a few years ago, and that led to many, many reports of UAPs. So many of the events certainly have conventional explanation. The interesting ones are ones that lack conventional explanation. The ones that we looked at did not have sufficient data for us to draw important conclusions from it. And in many ways, our biggest conclusion, our report, and I think this is something that we do as scientists. When we see something we don't understand, we don't try to jump to the most exciting conclusion, but we set about collecting more data and better data so that we can understand what's going on.
And that is one of the key recommendations in your independent study team's report, that NASA has to improve its ability to collect data and then to verify it. Tell me, what are the concrete steps you recommend that NASA takes to improve its collection and verification of data?
So I think in some ways our biggest recommendation, and one that ideally will involve many of your viewers, is we're encouraging NASA to develop an app for people's cell phones. Cell phones not only take terrific pictures, they record GPS position, they record time, they measure sound, they measure magnetic field, they see what's going on in the environment. And they can be used, I think, to record high quality images and videos, record them in ways in which we can tell that they're not being edited or spoofed. And if we have events that we see images from multiple angles and multiple cameras, that increases our confidence that what we're seeing is not some defect in the camera. I think we've all had the experience, for example, of pointing a camera too close to the sun and you see strange things. And having multiple cameras will let us determine velocity and acceleration of objects. And what I hope will come out of our report is the development of such an app for a phone, one that does not do any clever pre-filtering of images. Your cell phone camera actually works these days to improve the image quality. It has some AI in it. I think we want to make it just the straight direct image so we have cleaner data to interpret. And that there be a website that people upload their data to.
And do you have any idea who will make these apps? Who would you rely on to make such an app?
Our job was to come up with recommendations, and this is something where there are a number of potential commercial vendors, and NASA will have its process for figuring out how they would want to obtain the.
Things have really changed, haven't they? Because once upon a time, a highly esteemed organization like NASA may not be very interested in people uploading their homemade pictures and videos and so on. And now they're saying you actually could be one of our greatest resources. Billions of people around the planet with mobile phones snapping these UAPs, uploading them to a website. But how would you analyze so much data?
Well, I think this is something where citizen science would help. There's a lot of tools we now have with AI and machine learning that are helpful for analyzing large data sets. I think the first thing we'll learn, and this is important for finding anomalies, is we have to figure out what normal looks like. We will have lots of data on balloons and drones from odd angles at odd conditions. And that's our foreground. So, I think of the problem of finding anomalies in general, including understanding UAPs, as looking for a needle in a haystack, right? We've got a lot of chaff of these background events. And when you look for a needle in a haystack, you've got two choices. Either you know exactly what the needle looks like, and then technically what you do is you develop a match filter looking for needles, or you develop a very good model of what hay looks like, and you look for anything that's different from hay. And that's how a lot of our machine learning-based searches work. And having a large data set of what may be mostly normal events that get uploaded will be very valuable for finding the unusual ones.
And we're moving into a new era where artificial intelligence and machine learning can sift through that vast quantity of data that you're expecting. But you've still got to overcome the stigma of reporting that someone has seen a UFO or a UAP. You mentioned that in your report. I wasn't aware that people still felt there was a stigma attached to reporting that they'd seen a UFO or a UAP. Is there?
Oh, I think there's very much a stigma, particularly for military and commercial pilots. Pilots, are expected to be, you don't want your commercial pilot seeing things. And people feel that it would hurt their reputation as a pilot if they report things. Going back 20 years ago, the pilots associated with the Tic Tac event were made fun of by their fellow pilots for their report.
Well, we'll come back to that in a second. As I understand it, the Aviation Safety Reporting System, which is somewhat overseen by NASA, says it receives 100,000 reports a year from pilots and air traffic control about UAPs. Is that correct?
I don't know that number. I know that there's a lot of reports of anomalous events that come in. And, the FAA, which is our aviation safety agency, wants to know about anything strange that a pilot sees or experiences, particularly anything associated with its planes. That's how we make air travel safe.
Just staying with the subject of stigma, I understand that when you were on the dais with the other people from NASA, and people were really curious as to who would lead the UAP research unit, and you and others were saying, we're not going to give you his identity, and then a couple of days later it came out. Can you just first tell us why you were reluctant to give that man's identity?
Well, I don't work for NASA, so that was a NASA decision. A lot of the reluctance came from some of the experiences of some of the people on our panel. There are people in the particularly, I would call UFO believer community who are extremely hostile to anyone who doesn't immediately announce we're believing things. And there are people who believe that NASA, which is not an agency that maintains secrets, is keeping lots of secrets.
Well, Mark McInerney is his name. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I think that's right.
I understand he's not really a scientist, but more of a political appointment. Is that the case?
I think he's more of a civil servant.
Right.
He's someone who's rose up through the administrative and leadership side of NASA, is my understanding. I've only met him once. I don't know him.
From what I understand, some people are rather disappointed that he wasn't a scientist and that he was a political appointment. Do you think it makes any difference?
Well, he's not a political appointment. I'm almost certain he's a civil servant.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
NASA is primarily civil servants, and I've worked with lots of civil servants, some who have backgrounds in science, some more in the engineering or management side, and this ultimately is a position that's primarily a management position. You're setting up a study, you're interacting with people. Some scientists are good managers, some are not.
But you mentioned you mentioned that NASA doesn't hold secrets and it wants to be more and more transparent. And was it the pressure from the public saying, why don't you name the new head of the UAP research unit that forced them to reveal Mark McInerney's name?
I don't know. That was an internal decision that I was not part of.
Okay, fair enough. Now let's talk about transparency. And people do suspect, as you say, that NASA and the military are withholding information. And then they point to, for example, the testimony of three now very famous former military officers. Let's start with, and they all went before Congress, didn't they, on July the 26th this year. So David Grush, let's introduce him if people don't know who he is. He's the one who says that he had conversations with unnamed officials that led him to believe that the US federal government maintains a secretive UFO or UAP recovery program and is in possession of non-human spacecraft along with their dead pilots. What do you make of that claim by David Grush?
I would say important if true, but my response would be kind of show me the money. Where are these sites? Who are these people? He wouldn't name anything, right? I mean, when someone gets up and says, there are secrets that you don't know, certainly possible, right? Does the Defense Department have secrets that they don't share with the rest of us? Almost certainly, mostly military secrets that they maintain as part of our security, right? Are they likely hiding alien species? I don't know. My experience with the military is things leak. Anything that would lead. Let me give you something that's consistent with my experience. Any leak that can increase the budget of an agency happens. And if there was a secret agency, they would want to increase its budget.
Yeah.
And it would leak. And any budget like this has to be authorized by Congress and the executive branch, and it would also leak. So the claim that we've kept these secrets for decades seems unlikely to me, but that's just from my experience with the government. Is journalists are good at getting leaks out, so I think we would know if this were true. That said, I think the right response to David Grush is show us where the sites are. Show us, tell us about where these alien bodies are, and let's look at samples and study them and see what's there. Let's get the facts out if it's true.
I think at this point it might be helpful for viewers just to know the difference between NASA and the military. Now, NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was established around 65 years ago, 1958, and is an independent agency, but of the federal government, but is distinct from the US military. Can you just make that distinction clearer for us?
Yeah, I mean, NASA's mission is to study the universe around us, observe the Earth, and explore space. It's a civilian agency. The data it produces is open and widely available. The Defense Department's primary job is defending the United States. Very, very different mission.
And to be clear, NASA handles declassified material on the whole, and it's the military that handle the classified material. And is Aero part of the military, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office? Because apparently they lead the whole of government response to UAPs. That's
correct. So I think about it how NASA and the Defense Department handle an image they take. If you take an image from an F-16, it is immediately classified because the military doesn't want to reveal the capabilities of the cameras on an F-16. And the same is true of an image taken from a spy satellite. They're immediately classified because they don't want to reveal capabilities to potential adversaries. So whether it's an image of a bird or a UAP, it's always classified. And I think this leads to a sense of conspiracy when people say, show me that image, and they say, we can't, it's classified. And it's a big process to declassify something to make sure that in revealing the image, you don't reveal capabilities.
Right.
On the other hand, NASA's approach on the data it takes, whether of Earth or in space, is NASA takes data, it makes it public to the world. You can go on the Hubble telescope's website, and you can find data that Hubble has taken, and all that data is available for everyone to look at. So it's a very different culture. And I think some of this is you're a culture, for example, with pilots. You're a Navy pilot flying on a mission and you see something strange, your job is to make sure it's not a threat to you or to the ship you're supporting. Once you've determined that, you stay on target and go to your plane and you don't make delays. And you certainly wouldn't want your commercial pilot flying from London to Chicago to announce that he's going to go on a detour to study the strange thing he sees.
Okay.
Scientists, on the other hand, our job is, if we see something strange, to go investigate.
Now let's just stay with the military very briefly, and then I must get on to other questions about extraterrestrial life. We mentioned the Tic Tac incident, I think, and that's David Fravor. David Fravor, the former commanding officer of the U.S. Navy's Black Aces Squadron, also went, as did David Grush, before Congress, and he said that he circled a UFO while flying his Super Hornet over the Pacific in 2004, describing the object as looking like a smooth Tic Tac, a cylinder with no wings. Video of the incident, as you mentioned, was declassified in 2020. When you look at that video, presumably you have not yet identified what it is. So what is your best guess?
Either my best guess would be the most likely thing would probably be some kind of drone, right? I think we've seen that drones are much more advanced than people had understood. We're seeing the powerful role that drones are playing, both for the Russian and Ukrainian military in that war. And I think one possibility would be that this is a drone being developed by another nation that was investigating U.S. aircraft.
That's pretty.
That would be
that's
one possibility.
Right.
That's but I don't think we have enough data to prove that possibility or more exotic possibilities. I think we look at the Tic Tac incident and say, at least I do, and say, that's really intriguing. I don't really know what's going on. I'd like to have more data. I'd like to have things set up in a way that we could go back and study that in more detail.
If another country has that sort of technology, doesn't that make the United States government and the United States people very worried?
Other countries have drone and balloon technologies of various kinds.
If they have drone and any other flying objects that can completely confound, some of your best pilots, then doesn't that mean that they're more advanced than the United States in such technology?
I think this is an ongoing worry of the U.S. military, that other countries are developing more advanced technology than they do. That's something they stay on top of, and they and our intelligence agencies worry a lot, I think, particularly at this point about Chinese technology.
Fair enough.
Right, I think we saw that with the Chinese balloon incident.
Can we just end then on Professor Avi Loeb from Harvard? They call him the leading alien hunter, and I believe you've known him for some time. It's suggested that he may have found fragments of an alien spacecraft from meteor deposits from 2014. He went out to the Pacific Ocean, dredged up a few tiny little spherical objects, millimeters in size, and he believes that the composition suggests that it has come from outside of our solar system and maybe even from an alien spacecraft. What do you make of those claims?
Well, I think those claims are unconvincing. The samples he's shown, they've described them in a scientific paper that's not yet been accepted for publication. It was submitted for review, but the results made public, and people who are far more expert than he on meteoritic material have said that this material looks pretty normal, and that you'd find other samples like this elsewhere on the ocean's floor, and in no way is there anything really convincing about this to jump to such a dramatic conclusion.
One last thing before we go. What is NASA's current stance on the existence of extraterrestrial life?
Well, NASA's view is that, I guess my view, we know that there are many planets out there. This is one of the great discoveries in astronomy in the last 20 years, is we realize that planets are as common as stars. We're discovering more and more planets that are somewhat Earth-like mass around Earth-like stars. We're getting planets closer and closer to those properties. We're finding planets that could be able to host life. So I think we know that there are environments out there that could host life. We don't know how often life evolves. We don't know how life originated on Earth. And so we don't know yet whether life is common or not in our universe.
Professor David Spergel, thank you so much for your time today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see our last show on aliens, which has now been viewed 1.2 million times, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.